Greetings. The State Public Charter School Authorities Assessment and Accountability Team has published a series of 3 virtual training videos for charter school staff. The first is an assessment and accountability orientation. The second is an overview of the annual NSPF school star ratings. And the third relates to the SPCSA academic performance framework. This presentation is the second of the series in which we'll be providing an overview of Nevada's annual school rating system, the Nevada School Performance Framework, or NSPF. Let us first introduce ourselves. We are the data and reporting team for the SPCSA and typically refer to ourselves as the Accountability and Assessment Team. Our mission is stated in the first bullet. Essentially, we help schools meet deadlines and submit accurate data. Here we provide an overview of the presentation. On the left are the intended outcomes. By the end of this presentation, we hope that you'll have enhanced your knowledge of the annual school star ratings, or NSPF, including its purpose and the performance it measures. We also want you to be able to read and interpret an NSPF report. Finally, we want you to know where to find additional information on the NSPF if you need it. Those outcomes align with our agenda. The first section of the presentation will outline the purpose and history of the NSPF, while the second and third will go into more detail about how the NSPF functions and the performance it measures. In the fourth item, we'll walk through the NSPF report, while the last will provide resources. We'll start by outlining the purpose of the Nevada School Performance Framework, or NSPF. First, the federal law, known as the Every Student Succeed Act, or ESSA, requires all states to use an accountability system to annually rate all public schools with that state. Nevada statute NRS 385A is aligned with this federal requirement and sets out additional details. Beyond the statutory requirements, state accountability systems are a general practice that serve many purposes. First, they supply performance targets and incentivize actions that lead to improved student outcomes in schools. Second, they deliver information on the quality of education being provided to a range of stakeholders. Third, these accountability systems encourage all schools, including those that are already high performing, to continually reflect on and improve the quality of education being provided to their students and specific student groups. And finally, they help identify underperforming schools so that targeted resources can be provided. Next, we'll speak to the history of NSPF. To fulfill the requirements under federal law, or ESSA, the Nevada Department of Education, which we'll refer to as the NDE, created the Nevada School Performance Framework. We want to convey that the current NSPF was not designed by just one staff member at NDE. It was designed with significant, diverse stakeholder input over many years, which is still ongoing. There have been a couple of iterations, each of which have been improved upon. Taken together, this engagement has produced an accountability system that reflects Nevada values, as the NDE likes to put it. The NSPF is not perfect, but it sufficiently does the job it's supposed to do. At this point, we've discussed the purpose and history of the NSPF. Next, we'll move to an overview of the NSPF and outline a few of its basic principles. At the very highest level, each public school is issued an annual index score and corresponding star rating based on that school's performance on various measures over the prior school year. Ratings are published by the NDE around September 15th for the prior school year. At the bottom, the tables outline the star rating score ranges for the elementary, middle, and high school rating systems. Let's next take a look underneath the star rating. The NSPF is comprised of measures categorized under indicators. As we hinted at in the prior slide, by showing you separate star rating point ranges for elementary, middle, and high schools, the measures and indicators are specific to each level, but there's some overlap. As a general example, an elementary school has a growth indicator, while a high school has a graduation rates indicator. However, both share the chronic absenteeism measure. A school earns points in the NSPF based on their performance in the measures according to point attribution tables, or PATs, where performance rates are tied to specific point ranges. Points earned for measures are totaled under their respective indicators, which are then summed to generate a final score worth a possible 100 points. This total score, also known as the NSPF index score, corresponds to a star rating from 1 to 5 based on the score tables we showed on the previous slide. You may also hear the term adjusted NSPF index score, which happens if a measure does not apply to a school. For example, if a school does not have any English learners, the English proficiency growth measure worth up to 10 points will not apply, and the school's score will be adjusted to reflect a possible point total of 90 instead of 100. In future slides, we'll go into further detail on the indicators and measures by level, elementary, middle, and high, but first we'll outline a few more NSPF basics. As we have stated multiple times, indicators and measures in the NSPF are specific to the elementary, middle, and high school levels. That means that a school or campus that is grades K through 8 receives two separate ratings. One rating for the elementary portion, grades K through 5, and another rating for the middle school portion, grades 6 through 8. We have shown an example from a K through 8 SPCSA school, Pinecrest St. Rose. In the most recent ratings from 2018 and 19, they received two ratings, a 4-star rating for the elementary and a 5-star rating for the middle. Note that in conjunction with the NDE, the SPCSA has standardized grade spans for elementary, middle, and high school ratings, where K through 5 is elementary, 6 through 8 is middle, and 9 through 12 is high. Another important note is that data do not flow unchecked into the NSPF. Throughout the year, SPCSA schools are responsible for validating and/or submitting data that are used by the NDE in their NSPF star rating. As examples, schools validate assessment and graduation rate data during those respective windows and provide a data file or files such as that for chronic absenteeism. Additionally, the NDE provides preliminary NSPF data for review before the star ratings are officially published. At that point, student level changes cannot be made, but if larger scale issues are found, the NDE may address those at their discretion. Essentially, the point we're trying to make is that districts and charter schools have ample opportunities to validate data and correct issues before final ratings are published in September. But don't worry, as the note says at the bottom, SPCSA staff is here to help you stay on top of the deadlines and submit accurate data. We send a lot of reminders, provide guidance, and frequently conduct back-end data quality checks. Another important basic item is that not every student is counted in a school's star rating. Federal law, ESSA, indicates that students cannot be counted in a school's rating if they have not attended the school for at least half of the school year. There are a few exceptions. For example, this provision does not apply to graduation rates and a few other measures. But this rule does ensure that not only students that have had sufficient instructional time at a school are counted toward that school's rating. The NDE uses something called Year in School, or YIS, to include or exclude students in a school's rating. When YIS equals yes, or 1 for a certain student, that student is counted in the school's rating. Additionally, YIS equals yes when a student has been enrolled at a school for at least 1/2 of the school year. This last sub-bullet returns to the point we made on the previous slide regarding data validation. YIS is something that charter schools are responsible for adding and/or validating during data validation processes. It is extremely crucial to make sure YIS is accurate for your students so that the correct population of students count in your rating. You would not want to be a 2-star school instead of a 3-star school because you forgot to exclude 20 students that did not receive adequate instructional time at your school. An additional important basic item is that the NSPF helps the NDE identify and support underperforming schools, including low-performing schools, schools with consistently underperforming student groups, and schools with very low-performing student groups. If a school falls into one of the above categories, it might or may receive a designation as such: Comprehensive Support and Improvement, CSI, which is for low-performing schools, Targeted Support and Improvement, TSI, which is for consistently underperforming student groups, Additional Targeted Support and Improvement, ATSI, which is for very low performing student groups. A designation can result in a star rating penalty. For example, a 5-star school identified as TSI could instead become a 3-star school. Additionally, a designation may result in additional funding that may be dependent upon written plans, such as CSI or TSI plans, to address the underlying issues. The final basic item relates to how the NSPF impacts SPCSA schools. First, the NSPF provides one data point amongst many others that inform future SPCSA authorizing decisions, such as charter amendments or renewals. Please note that poor academic performance and/or an NSPF rating below 3 stars for an SPCSA school may be of higher consequence than that of a local school district. The most severe consequences include permissive or mandatory termination. Permissive termination can occur for high schools that have a graduation rate under 60% for the immediately preceding school year. Elementary and middle schools that are in the lowest 5% statewide in regard to the NSPF score for the immediately preceding school year. And elementary, middle, and high schools that receive a 1 or 2-star rating for the last 3 ratings. Mandatory termination occurs when a school has 3 1-star ratings in any 5-year period. Aside from termination, poor academic performance may result in an SPCSA notice of concern, or in more egregious cases, a notice of breach. In these cases, the school is responsible for correcting unsatisfactory performance. Notices may require additional communication, monitoring, reporting, and/or that the school develop a corrective action plan. Notices can also be issued if there is poor financial and/or organizational performance, which are beyond the scope of this presentation.
Now that we have provided a high-level overview of the NSPF and some of its basic principles, we will now discuss the individual measures and indicators that make up the NSPF. Here, The NSPF measures and indicators, along with their possible point totals, are displayed for each level, elementary, middle, and high. With this side-by-side comparison, you can see that there is some overlap between all three levels, but there are also measures and indicators specific to certain levels. For example, all three contain the chronic absenteeism measure. However, the high school system is the only one with graduation rates. During this section of the presentation, we will move through the measures and indicators one by level, and we'll discuss how each are calculated. With that information, you'll better understand how your rating will be calculated. First, we will start with the elementary school NSPF indicators and measures. Under the academic achievement indicator, worth up to 25 points, there are two measures, the pooled proficiency measure worth 20 points and the read by grade 3 measure worth 5 points. The pooled proficiency measure is based on proficiency rates calculated from the required state assessments in ELA and math, 3rd through 5th grade, as well as science, given in 5th grade. Importantly, results from all three subject areas are pooled together, i.e., math proficiency is not calculated separately from ELA proficiency. The calculation sums together the number proficient in math plus the number proficient in ELA plus the number proficient in science and divides it by the sum of the number assessed in each subject area, all to arrive at a pooled proficiency rate. This rate is then tied to a point total using the point attribution table for the measure. We have provided all the point attribution tables in an appendix of this presentation. The data sources for this measure are the Smarter Balanced and NA assessment results files, which the SPCSA provides to schools once they are finalized by the NDE. One additional note is that assessment participation below 95% may lead to point deductions in this indicator. Federal law requires 95% or greater participation in state assessments, so the NDE has put this disincentive in place to encourage participation. The read by grade 3 measure is the ELA proficiency rate of 3rd graders. This measure is generally aligned with Nevada's read by grade 3 law. It is calculated by simply finding the rate of 3rd graders that are proficient in ELA, and the data also comes from the Smarter and NA results files. These students are also counted in the pooled proficiency measure, so note that ELA 3rd graders are counted twice in the NSPF in this area, an indication of the importance of read by 3 to Nevada. Now we move to the growth indicator, which has median growth percentile measures and adequate growth percentile measures for both math and ELA. Note that this indicator is worth 35 points out of 100 total. This weighting indicates Nevada believes growth is a very important component of the NSPF. Growth is a little bit complex. At its core, growth is calculated using at least 2 consecutive years of Smarter Balanced test scores. It may use more years if available. The NDE then takes those multiple years of scores and calculates how much growth the student has made compared to their peers across the state, using something called Student Growth Percentiles, or SGPs, which are a number from 1 to 99. As an example, if a student has a growth percentile, or SGP, of 75, that means the student has shown more growth than 75% of their peers. The NDE also uses adequate growth percentiles, or AGPs, to calculate if a student is on track to proficiency. The AGP is the minimum SGP a student must earn to remain proficient or be on track for proficiency within 3 years or by the end of 8th grade. An AGP can be thought of as a target. If the student has met their AGP target, that means the student is on track to stay or become proficient. AGPs are calculated for each student each year, so the target is annually adjusted to account for whether a student has scored in the past. Please note that growth follows a student. So if a student was at a different school in the past, growth scores are still calculated for that student because growth follows the student. There is a note here at the bottom stating growth is not calculated for 3rd graders, as 2 years of scores are needed and smarter assessments only start in the 3rd grade. Also, growth is not calculated for students taking the NA, the alternative assessment for students with the most cognitive, and developmental disabilities. After that overview of growth, hopefully the median growth percentile and adequate growth percentile measures for both math and ELA are somewhat clearer. The median growth percentile measure is simply the median of a school's student growth percentiles. As an example, if a student had 5 students with SGPs of 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90, the median growth percentile, or MGP, would be 70, the SGP in the middle of the list, if that list was arranged in numerical order. If a school has a high MGP, such as 85, that means students at the school have demonstrated much more growth than their peers across the state. The data source for this measure is the NDE Smarter Growth File, which the SPCSA provides to schools once it's finalized by the NDE. The adequate growth percentile measure is the percent of students that have met their growth targets, or AGPs. If a school has a high rate of students meeting their AGP, it means many students are on track to remain or become proficient. Sometimes a school's proficiency rate under the academic achievement indicator may be low, but the AGP rate may be high, indicating proficiency may increase in the future. Again, the data source for this measure is the NDE Smarter Growth File. The next indicator is the English Language Proficiency Indicator, worth 10 points, which contains one measure, the WIDA AGP measure. The WIDA Adequate Growth Percentile measure is calculated similarly to Smarter Balanced AGPs, except WIDA assessment results are used to calculate student growth percentiles and student AGPs, or targets. The measure is the percent of English learner students who have met their WIDA AGP or growth target, telling one what percent of ELs are on track to English proficiency in 5 years or by grade 12, and a subsequent exit from EL services. The data source for this measure is the NDE WIDA Growth File. Again, the SPCSA provides this when it is received from the NDE. Next up is the Closing Opportunity Gaps Indicator, worth 20 points, which has math and ELA measures worth 10 points each. This measure again relates to growth, so you can see a trend in the weighting of growth measures. If you add up the growth indicator and this Closing Opportunity Gaps Indicator, that is 55 points. So growth is worth more than half of the points available in the NSPF for elementary and middle schools. The opportunity gaps measures are the percent of students that have met their current year AGP or growth target who were not proficient last year. Generally, a high rate in these measures indicate a school has done a good job to get students who performed poorly last year back on track to proficiency this year. This calculation is performed for both math results and ELA results. The data sources here are the current year NDE Smarter Growth File and the prior year Smarter Balanced Results File, although the current year growth file includes prior year proficiency results for ease of reference. The last indicator for elementary schools is the Student Engagement Indicator, which contains one measure worth 10 points, the Chronic Absenteeism measure. Chronic absenteeism may be one of the measures most correlated to success in the NSPF. Schools with low chronic absenteeism rates are more likely to have higher star ratings, mainly because they have students in seats who are learning. If students are absent, they're missing out on valuable learning time. The chronic absenteeism measure calculates the percent of students that were absent 10% or more of their school days. The data source for this measure is a data file submitted by schools to the SPCSA, who provides it to the NDE. Schools are able to run a report out of Infinite Campus that meets the requirements for this data submission. This report is not just designed to be run at the end of the year. It can be run at any point during the year, so charter staff can keep tabs on their students and chronic absenteeism rates. Now that we have run through the elementary school indicators and measures, let's turn to the middle school system. Luckily, the measures highlighted in blue here are those that are also found in the elementary system. They are calculated in the exact same way as the elementary measures, except they include middle school students instead, those in grades 6, 7, and 8. Instead of the read by grade 3 measure, middle schools have two different measures under the Student Engagement Indicator. The Academic Learning Plans measure, worth 2 points, and the 8th grade credit requirements measure, worth 3 points. The academic learning plans measure is the percent of students with an academic learning plan. This measure is aligned with Nevada state law that requires all middle school students to have an academic learning plan. The plan requirements are set forth in the NRS linked on this slide and basically must outline educational goals a pupil intends to achieve before promotion to high school, an identification of courses required for promotion to high school, an identification of honors, CTE, and other similar courses and programs, and a description of the expectations of the students. There is no excuse not to earn these 2 points in the NSPF. They are basically 2 free points, so please make sure to have these plans set up for your students. The data source for this measure is a data file submitted by schools to the SPCSA, who provides it to the NDE. Schools are able to run a report out of Infinite Campus that meets the requirements, but of course, the data should be validated and confirmed by the school prior to submission. The other measure specific to middle schools is the 8th grade credit requirements measure, worth 3 points. This measure is the percent of 8th grade students that met specific credit requirements for promotion to high school. This measure is aligned with Nevada regulations that state a student must earn with a passing grade 1.5 credits in English and math, along with 1 credit in science and social studies during their 7th and 8th grade years. The data source for this measure is a data file submitted by schools to the SPCSA, who provides it to the NDE. Schools are able to run a report out of Infinite Campus that meets the requirements, but of course, data should be validated and confirmed by the school prior to submission. Moving to the high school system, the high school NSPF only has 2 items calculated like the elementary and middle school system, the English proficiency indicator and the chronic absenteeism measure, which we will not go over again. The remaining measures will be discussed one by one on the next few slides. Under the high school academic achievement indicator, proficiency measures are calculated for each subject area separately. This is in contrast to the elementary and middle school proficiency measures where results from math, ELA, and science are pooled together to calculate one pooled proficiency rate. The math and ELA measures here use 11th grade results from the ACT and the NA and are simply the rate of students that are proficient. A few important notes here. The first is that only ACT test scores from state test dates are used. Results from other ACT dates, like those on Saturdays, do not count in the NSPF. Second, similar to the assessment participation rule in the elementary and middle school NSPFs, low school or student group participation in the assessments, that being less than 95%, may lead to a point deduction in this indicator. And third, ACT participation on a state test day is a graduation requirement. The high school science measure is somewhat complicated because schools may choose to give the high school science assessment in the 9th or 10th grade. As such, this measure uses prior and current year high school science results to find a proficiency rate. It sums the number of 9th grade proficient from the prior year data, the number of 10th grade proficient from the current year data, and the number of 11th grade proficient in the NA science portion from the current year, and divides it by the respective number assessed. The graduation rates indicator is worth 30 points, a significant portion of the high school NSPF. There are 2 measures that are calculated similarly, the 4- and 5-year graduation rates. Both of these measures use a cohort of students that begins in the 9th grade, where transfer-ins to a school are added to the cohort and transfer-outs from a school are removed. At the end of 4 or 5 years, the graduation rate is calculated. The data sources are the 4- and 5-year graduation rate files, which are validated by charter schools during the graduation rate validation processes. Of note, because graduation rates cannot be finalized until after the September NSPF release, since schools have until October 1 to graduate students, graduation rates must be lagged 1 year in the NSPF. As an example, in the 21-22 school year NSPF ratings, which will be released in September 2022, graduation rates from the class of 20-21 will be used. Additionally, YIS or year in school is not used in the graduation rate measures. Next, we move to the College and Career Readiness, or CCR indicator, which is worth 25 points. The first two measures under this indicator, which are related to CCR participation and completion, are worth 10 points each. Essentially, these measures separately calculate the percent of 12th graders who were participants and completers in various post-secondary preparation programs during their high school career, including advanced placement, international baccalaureate, career and technical education, and/or dual credit dual enrollment. The data source for these measures is a file provided by charter schools to this SPCSA, who provides it to the NDE. We will not go into detail regarding the definitions of participant and completer for each of the programs, but they are listed here. Note that a student can be counted as both a participant and completer in most cases. The Advanced or CCR Diploma measure, worth 5 points, is the last measure under the College and Career Readiness, or CCR indicator. The measure is the percent of students that received either an advanced or CCR diploma. The data come from the 4-year graduation rate data file, which is validated by charter schools during the graduation rate validation process. Because this measure is tied to graduation rates, the data are again lagged 1 year, similar to the measures under the graduation rate indicator. The last high school measure is the 9th grade credit sufficiency measure, which is worth 5 points. This measure is the percent of 9th grade students who have earned 5 or more credits by the end of their 9th grade year. This rule is tied to Nevada regulations, NAC, that specify a 9th grade student must earn 5 credits for promotion to 10th grade. The data source is again a file provided by charter schools to the SPCSA, who provides it to the NDE. Schools can run a report out of Infinite Campus that meets the requirements. However, schools must check the report for accuracy before submission, as Infinite Campus reports may not always report correctly.
At this point, we'll now discuss where to access and how to read NSPF star rating reports. Star rating reports can be accessed from the home page of the Nevada Accountability Portal. The search box can be used to find specific schools. On the next few slides, we'll use the Pinecrest St. Rose campus as an example. Post-search, the school's homepage is shown. Here, a range of data can be viewed, but for the purposes of this example, we'll focus on the NSPF-related items. Starting from the left, full NSPF reports can be accessed under the School Rating Report tab. Further below, there's a snapshot of the school's star ratings. Finally, on the right, there's a year drop-down menu, so past year reports can be found. Once on the full NSPF report page, we can switch between school levels if needed and download a PDF of the report. On this page, the year can be changed as well. Here is a view of the full star rating report for the Pinecrest St. Rose Elementary campus. At the top left and right, there's information about the school, including its demographics. And in the top middle, the current year score and star rating is prominently displayed, along with prior year scores and ratings just below that. At the top right, there's information on whether the school has received a designation for low performance, as well as a note stating whether the school has met the required 95% assessment participation. In the middle section of the report includes a descriptor of the school's star rating, along with text describing how ratings are determined. There's also a table that displays the point ranges corresponding to star ratings. Toward the bottom are the performance data. There are dials displaying points earned in the indicators, and the tables below each indicator show school performance in the measures, such as proficiency rates. There's also a district data comparison shown. In the indicator heading is clicked on the website, not in the PDF, more information can be displayed, which we'll show on the next slide. On the full information view, a detailed description of the indicator and its measures is provided. In the middle right, points earned in each measure is displayed, as these are not displayed on the main report. Finally, multiple years of data are provided for various student groups, including race, ethnicity, special education, those with IEPs, English learners, and students eligible for free or reduced price lunch. With the NSPF reports behind us, we'll next talk about where to find more information on the NSPF if needed. On this slide, we've provided a few resources if you'd like more information on the NSPF. The first bullet has links to the NDE NSPF Technical and Procedures Manual. The second link is the NDE's Nevada Accountability Portal website, where one can find star rating reports and additional resources such as quick fact documents on portions of the NSPF. As we move toward the end of this training, we'd like to revisit the intended outcomes. We hope that you've enhanced your knowledge of the NSPF star ratings, including its purpose and the performance it measures. Additionally, you should now know how to read and interpret the NSPF report and find additional information on the NSPF if needed. That brings us to the end of our presentation. We hope you found this training video to be helpful and useful for future reference. Thank you for attending. The contact information for the SPCSA Accountability and Assessment Team is shown here as of August 2021, if there are any additional questions.